Well, thank you, John. Great to meet you and great to talk to you today. You mind introducing yourself?
Great. Yeah. My name is John Beccia. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a firm called FS. Little background about me. I've been in financial services for a very long time, a lot of different roles. Lawyer by training, but always kind of wore multiple hats. So legal, compliance, worked for a number of banks. I also worked for a trade association with the largest financial institutions in the US. And then I got pulled into fintech and actually very deep into fintech, working for a crypto company called Circle in Boston, 2013, so early days there. So it was really there where I saw this whole change, what was happening in financial services. And so went from my more traditional banking background and legal compliance and then into the fintech space, full throttle and, spent a lot of time there. And the other piece of my background, spent a little time doing some government relations work as well, because a lot of this, that ties into a lot of the background and what's going on in financial services these days.
That's a amazing background, and sounds like you've been at some critical places at critical times. One question that I have is, being a former engineer who's now in fintech, like I sort of have like a bit of a engineer mentality a lot of times when I'm looking at fintech. As a former lawyer, now working in fintech on the business side, like, do you still have that mentality, or like how has that evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I started an advisory firm is to get away from being kind of a lawyer and really understanding the business side and the technology. I think it's important to understand the risks from a regulatory legal standpoint, but more importantly, in terms of how do you apply those to the business, and especially the way the technology is evolving right now, moving so quickly. It's exciting to see some of these use cases and some of the ways that financial services can evolve, but it's really taking that and understanding it from business standpoint in terms of how do we build this? How do we scale a business, in financial services? And so, the legal background is very helpful in terms of, understanding that because it's a very heavily regulated industry. But it's also as important to understand, take from a business standpoint and certainly a technology background, understand the underlying technology around all of these new models.
And what was sort of the germination of starting FS Vector? And can you talk to me a little bit about what it does now?
Yeah. So I think it was what was happening in financial services, right? So talk about this evolution and the changing of, the delivery of financial services. Everybody's using their phones and different applications and, and well as it was basically a disintermediation of banking, right? So there's a better way to do payments. There's a better way to do lending and it provides more access to capital, provides a better way to provide financial products to consumers and businesses. And I think that was the reason, seeing that change, and also again the issue of regulation. Right, and there's a lot of novel regulatory issues, and how do you marry the two? How do you work through it? And so when I was a lawyer or in house, you work with law firms and you look with outside counsel, and they're always telling you the things you can't do, right? But not how to get it done. And I think, the kind of philosophy behind FS Vector is providing real advice, practical advice, being an embedded partner with our clients. So really trying to help them build and scale their businesses. And so thinking through how do we do this in the most practical manner, but also understanding there's a lot of real risk associated with these business models. And so how do we mitigate the risks, but also really achieve the benefits that these products and services can provide?
And over the course of time since you started FS Vector versus now, like, has there been an evolution in terms of the types of problems or questions you're answering or solving, and or even in terms of like what might be some of like the critical things that that you guys bring to bear to solve these problems?
Yeah, there's been a great evolution. I think, when we first started this, so we've been around for about 6.5 years, and like early days was a little bit of the earlier days in fintech. And what was happening, you saw this wave of early stage startups and companies, a lot of great ideas, and try and provide new products and services for consumers and businesses. And it was a little bit of an experimentation, right? And then also you had this, push and pull between that and the fact that all these entities are regulated, right? So how do you regulate them? And really, when you think about regulation, you have to think about what are the activities you're doing, what are the associated risks, and how do you deal with that? But I think the evolution is now we're going to a more mature phase. And it's about really working with these companies to work through these areas, both from a business standpoint and a regulatory standpoint. And I think that, I'm excited to the future because I think we're starting to see a lot of real companies be built in this space and a lot of things that can really provide new and unique, really leverage a technology for new and unique products for consumers to be able to offer these. And I think, we're seeing a lot of great businesses being built in this space.
And as far as, the types of businesses that you work with geographically, even sector-wise, like, is it across the board or how do you what's
Yeah, we work mostly in the US.
okay.
And that means a lot of different things. We work, both on federal and state standpoint. A lot of these businesses are licensed at the state level, but we also help a lot of foreign companies come into the US. Everybody wants to be part of the US market, so we help them. And our client base is very diverse. And so we work across multiple verticals, payments, lending, credit, crypto. And it's not just fintechs, it's traditional banks, especially the banking as a service. That's a big area right now, right? And that's a big question mark in terms of how that space evolves. But we do a lot with traditional finance and also a lot of commerce companies. You think about the Amazons and the Apples and those other companies, they all want to have financial products and services as part of their platform. So, those are the types of companies that we help partner with and think through those things. So again, those are all very regulated, so there's a lot of questions, probably sometimes more questions than answers, a
Yeah.
lot of gray area, and that's kind of what we hopefully help work through in terms of how do we, get over the hump to achieve success for these firms.
One of the areas that does have a fair amount of questions right now, and you actually mentioned it, is banking as a service. Like, can you talk a little bit about where that sector is and where you expect it to evolve?
Yeah, it's a very important sector because we think about fintech, the growth of fintech, there's again, it's all regulated. So there's, a few different paths for fintech. You can either get licensed on your own or you can work with a bank and, working with a bank and this banking as a service model has become challenging because again, regulators are trying to understand what this means from a risk standpoint. What is it that, the fintechs are trying to do and how does that interact with the banks? And so it creates a lot of uncertainty and that's sometimes difficult from a regulatory standpoint. And so we've seen a lot of inconsistency in terms of supervision of these types of models. We've also seen a lot of um, questions in terms of the governance around those models. So you might have heard of the middleware providers, or you've heard of, you know, questions in terms of how these are uh, the structured in terms of the governance and the questions around like who's ultimately responsible for compliance and who's ultimately responsible for the client relationship. And so those are questions that need to be solved. So I think we're very, very critical time in terms of getting those questions solved, creating some standards. And I know there's been some efforts both from an industry standpoint as well as collaborating with regulators and other groups to kind of create some standards that we can work off in terms of, again, getting to some clarity and some certainty, because that's ultimately going to let this kind of model grow. And I think that's what everybody wants to happen. So I think we're in a very critical stage for making as a service. And I'm optimistic that over the next, 6 to 12 months, that it's going to take off. The other issue here is a lot of the banks in this space are smaller banks, right? So it becomes very hard for them in terms of you think about, risk from a risk management standpoint, you need a lot of investment, you need a lot of compliance, resources, people, technology to be successful in this space. And so, you know, that also becomes a challenge in terms of, it'd be nice to see some of the larger banks get more involved. It's nice to see, some of these other banks, be able to grow these businesses. But again, the real key element here is having that regulatory clarity and certainty.
That absolutely makes a lot of sense, and I do think that clarity, even if it's not exactly the clarity you were hoping for, is better than the vagueness that's there. And
Was always this push and pull talk also between rules based versus principle based regulation, right? You want too prescriptive. You want, especially when the technology is moving so fast. But that's always kind of that push and pull, and it's almost and then the other thing is always the regulatory pendulum. Like how much regulation is enough? And that's where we always kind of struggle with in these areas.
that's I love that you brought that up because obviously one of the hot areas right now is AI and how, that involves, like, data and algorithms and, like, thinking about the prescriptive versus the rules-based, like, for, how do you do that in AI specifically?
Yeah, well, AI is interesting altogether, right? So I came from the crypto space. I spent some time in crypto back to 2013, as I said, and I think when the regulators you have difficulty getting around to crypto, I think AI is going to be a whole different animal, right? Because there's so many great use cases. There's so many things that you can do with AI, both in from a customer facing perspective and also in the back office. And we've seen this a lot in kind of reg tech platforms or see machine learning tools and other tools that really been helpful in terms of identifying risk, but mitigating it, understanding customer behaviors. But I think the real question, the struggle is always going to be in terms of um, how do we make sure, we're comfortable with that risk and that we don't know everything. And so can we have principles-based regulation that allows us to have kind of a platform or kind of standards that allow us to be able to have these things, operate these platforms, but do so in a kind of responsible fashion?
Mm. And any thoughts as far as, like, how, uh, either as a fintech, like, how are there ways that they can sort of prepare themselves for what might be coming down the pipeline and, from some of these things you're talking about?
The fintechs that succeed are the ones that take regulation compliance very seriously, right?
Yeah.
And that are engaged in process and they work closely with their supervisors and supervisory entities. They are always educating because I think from it's tough being a regulator these days because it's hard to regulate if you don't understand the technology or the business or the use case, and it's moving so quickly. And so it's incumbent upon industry to kind of be able to educate, be able to tell them what they're doing and how they're mitigating risks and what are the benefits of these services. And so from a fintech standpoint, the best way to be prepared is to get kind of have all your ducks in a row to be able to have the answers to these questions, to look, you know, in terms of everything you want to do, what are the impacts of that? How can we build, very responsible compliance programs around it and to be able to evolve and scale?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Take a little bit of a pivot here. What was curious about what your experience at Fintech Meetup was like, and how obviously we met there. We continue to meet throughout the conference circuit, but I remember meeting you there. So
Yeah, yeah. No, my experience was great with FinTech Meetup. And you talk about conferences, and we go to a lot of conferences these days. And I think that's, it's time for the conference model to change. I think I'm excited to see the way FinTech Meetup's approach to it because it really you can go to these conferences and you can get great learnings and attend panels and all that's great. But I think it's the real value of these conferences are the relationships, especially for our business or even for our clients. It's having the ability to meet with other people, to be able to have the quality of people that you have at a fintech meetup, the kind of thought leaders, the influencers, the people we talk about what's going on in the fintech space and all these different stakeholders, right? Whether it's, the banks or the fintechs or the regulators or the service providers, all those folks, to have them all in the one room and then have this focused effort to have these meetings that, you try to do it on your own, but to have it facilitated for you is just a wonderful thing. And it really provides a lot of benefit, especially to those who really, want to take advantage of it and spend some time there and to meet with those people that really can help you benefit you from a business standpoint, from a career standpoint, or from a networking standpoint.
Oh, that's great. And were there any interesting meetings or people that you met this year that you wanted to highlight, or anything that might be interesting to hear?
Yeah, I thought, you go into these events and you say, okay, what is the ROI or is it, is it going to be beneficial? And, I had a lot of great meetings. And like I said, for our business, one of the values that we provide our clients is the network that we provide. We work with a lot of other service providers and law firms and venture capital firms and other reg tech providers and others. All those types of meetings were very successful in terms of building out those relationships, as well as other our meeting with our clients and prospects, prospective clients. So all those things, my first experience with FinTech Meetup was great because I was able to do that in a fashion and follow up after the event. And so, looking forward to doing it again this year.
That's great because I actually one of my, memories from this year's event, was running into you at when you were having that hosting that big dinner, and, like, it was actually really cool, like, just looking around and seeing all the people talking to each other, but it was actually a really nice environment, and as from your perspective, um, looking out to next year, and, what's sort of interesting to you, either, it doesn't have to be, with Fintech Meetup, but, like, generally for the industry, what's exciting you about next year?
Yeah, I'm excited about the trajectory of what's going on in the fintech space. I think again, I think the area has matured quite a bit. From a regulatory standpoint, I think we've worked through a lot of the issues in terms of, you've seen some enforcement actions, you've seen some kind of more clarity around some of the businesses and that whatnot. I think, so I think we're at the phase where we hopefully will get to, actually building out these businesses and maybe hopefully some fintech IPOs and more M&A activity would be great to see a lot more growth in this space. And so I think, like I said, I think the regulatory area is a little more. There's still some questions to be solved, but I think we've got more clarity than we have in the past, and so I'm very excited about that. And I continue to see great ideas come up. There's still a lot of early stage companies that we work with and startups, and others that are still trying to do great things and come up with new and interesting use cases. And I think we'll continue to see that over the course of next year. And then from a fintech meetup standpoint, I think, I'm excited again, just because we have so many new players in the space and, to see old friends, but also catch up and see a lot of these newer businesses that are emerging and going to market and getting to understand them and seeing, collectively how we can work together and collaborate because this has to be a collaboration. And I think, that's another thing that I've seen, which is great in terms of getting all those people in one area. It's helpful because the more you can learn from each other, the better in terms of, gravitating, building everyone up.
Well, that's wonderful, and, well, thank you again, John, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.